publish on average 2 videos per week, and many of those videos are about new advances in science. Because this channel is mostly focused on critical thinking, though, I can't just do a sort of I fucking love science sort of thing where I see a popular news story about a discovery and then I just sort of repeat it verbatim or share it with you. Instead, I look specifically for science that misses the mainstream or is somehow misinterpreted by the mainstream news, which means that in addition to reading the popular news story about a scientific advance, I unfortunately have to also read the actual research paper. I say unfortunately for 2 reasons. First, because most papers are really boring. I'm sorry, but it's true. A paper can be describing the most incredible discovery in the past 60 years of astrophysics, but honestly, it's mostly going to be numbers and statistical analyses of those numbers. And I mean, that's why we have good mainstream science news reporters, because they read the boring stuff so that the rest of us regular nerds can just get the fun stuff reported to us. The other reason it's unfortunate I have to read the original scientific paper is because of a little thing known as the paywall. Most research these days is published in a journal owned by one of 5 large corporations, all of whom charge $30 to $50 on average just to read one paper. And of course, to fully understand one paper, I can't just read that one paper. Often, I don't specialize in that industry or, that specific science, that field. So I have to read the important papers that paper references. And then sometimes I read all of those papers and then decide, you know what, actually there's not much of a video here. So I drop the subject and then I move on to something else. And that can get expensive. So in the past, I approached this problem from a variety of ways, like, I could pay for a paper. That's one tactic. But I could also sometimes just contact one of the authors and have them forward the study to me through email. Or I also had a lot of working scientists writing for me on Skepchick who had subscriptions to these journals through a university or an employer. So they could access the PDF for me and forward it to me. Because, you see, with the cost of individual papers being so bonkers, it's more economical for many large institutions to simply buy a package deal from each of these 5 publishers, kind of like getting a cable subscription instead of spending $5 per episode to watch all of the shows you want. Sure, you might end up with full access to Polka TV, which you never watch unless you're really high, but you also get all the seasons of Succession. So it's a good deal. And so it is with science. A lot of these institutions have scientists who, for their job, they have to read scientific papers. So instead of paying for each one, they get a subscription. These days, though, there is another way to access scientific research that is otherwise locked behind a paywall. And that's a thing called Sci-Hub. Sci-Hub was founded in 2011 by Alexandra Elbakian, a computer programmer who studied her undergrad in Kazakhstan at a university that wasn't able to afford the subscription fees to allow her to perform the necessary research to complete her thesis. So she pirated those studies and set up a website that made it easier for others in her situation to do the same. So at this point, I know some of you are thinking, well, I guess she's stealing, which is usually wrong, but it's not really immoral because those poor students have no legitimate way to access scientific knowledge that they need to advance their careers in science. And others of you are thinking, stealing is wrong no matter what the case, and so Sci-Hub and the people who use it are, in essence, immoral. If you can't afford the science, you can't be a scientist. I hear Burger King is hiring. But of course, as always on this channel, I'm going to say it's a bit more complicated than that. It's so complicated, in fact, that we can even question whether or not reading a paper on Sci-Hub is truly stealing or pirating. Allow me to explain. Actually, you know what? Allow me to completely steal a metaphor that I read a few years ago in a Vox article written by Brian Resnick and Julia Belluz, because it's so good that I think everyone should hear it. And by the way, as always, you can find a full transcript of this video with links to everything I mention over on my Patreon, which is linked in the doobly-doo below. Imagine your tax dollars have gone to build a new road in your neighborhood. Now imagine that the company overseeing the road work charged its workers a fee rather than paying them a salary. The overseers in charge of making sure the road was up to standard also weren't paid. And if you, the taxpayer, want to access the road today, you need to buy a 7-figure annual subscription or pay high fees for one-off trips. So that's ridiculous, right? I mean, who would do that? But it is, in fact, a direct metaphor for scientific publishing. They're not even exaggerating here. According to the Congressional Research Service, here in the United States, our tax dollars directly pay for about 43% of basic scientific research. Basic research being defined as experimental or theoretical work undertaken primarily to acquire new knowledge of the underlying foundations of phenomena and observable facts, without any particular application or use in view. About 26% of that basic research is covered by universities, including public universities that are funded by taxpayer dollars, and nonprofits. And the remaining 31% is handled by corporations. When it comes to applied research, which is defined as original investigation undertaken to acquire new knowledge, directed primarily, however, toward a specific practical aim or objective, our tax dollars directly cover about 35%, with 11% covered by universities and nonprofits, and 55% funded by corporations. So overall, our tax dollars pay for a huge chunk of the papers that are being published. But we, the taxpayers, the people who paid for those studies, cannot view the results of those studies without paying again to the journal that published them. A lot of people may assume, sensibly, that the journals have to charge readers a fee because they pay out to the scientists that are publishing with them and to the peers who are reviewing those studies. But they don't. Most of those major journals actually charge scientists to publish with them. The scientists do it anyway because they don't really have much choice, thanks to the idea of publish or perish, which is the axiom that means if you don't publish regularly in a reputable journal, then you will lose your job or fail to get grants for the next experiment. If those scientists want more people to be able to read their work, then they often actually need to pay the journal even more to make it open access. And there are plenty of other ways that journals charge scientists more and more to get certain perks to publish with them. And those major journals don't even bother to pay the peer reviewers who volunteer their time to make sure that garbage doesn't get through into a published journal. Of course, the journal does take on some costs like web hosting and editor salaries, but spending on those journals has increased at 5 times the rate of inflation. Elsevier, the largest of those publishers, boasts a profit margin of 37%. Compare that to a ranking of the highest profit margin industries from 2016. They found that accounting, tax preparation, bookkeeping, and payroll services was the highest percentage with 18.3%. Elsevier is making 37%. I know drug dealers with a lower profit margin than Elsevier. Elsevier's revenue in 2019 was $3.6 billion, which is about the same as the GDP of Guyana. In other words, they ain't going broke. But they are making scientists and institutions go broke, which is why in 2019, University of California, the institution that publishes a full 10% of all research done in the United States, took the unprecedented action of dropping their subscription to Elsevier to send a message that the future is open access. The world would be a better place when more people can freely access scientific research. It makes the already published research better because more people are able to see it, review it, and critique it. It encourages future researchers that can build upon what's already been done. And as a fun bonus, it allows the taxpayers who fund the research to actually appreciate the results that they paid for. I'm telling you all of this because last month I read an interesting piece in Nature detailing a court battle currently happening in India, in which Elsevier is suing Alexandra Elbakyan for copyright infringement due to Sci-Hub offering their articles for free. It's not the first time she's been sued by a long shot. She can basically never return to the United States because of several lawsuits from Elsevier and the American Chemical Society that resulted in $20 million in judgments against her. She didn't bother to show up in court to defend herself, probably because that would have been ridiculously expensive. Now they're trying to sue her in India in order to shut down Sci-Hub in that country. Because as a relatively poor country without the money to access these journals, many scientists there have to use Sci-Hub as a critical tool to inform their own research. I found the Nature article amusing because they failed to mention that Springer is the owner of Nature and is one of those 5 corporations who own most of the scientific journals. And they are notorious for locking their papers behind expensive paywalls. In fact, Springer has previously filed a lawsuit against Sci-Hub in France and got an injunction in the United Kingdom to force ISPs to block the site. Nature has a lot to gain by Sci-Hub losing the case in India, and in a more abstract way, they have a lot to gain by convincing the general public that Sci-Hub is nothing more than a Pirate Bay or mega upload for science. Mere pirates who are stealing the work of others and then handing it out for free or for their own gain somehow. But Sci-Hub isn't anywhere near to actually being a pirate site the way that those other sites were. Taxpayers didn't pay to make the new Kings of Leon album. No one needs the Kings of Leon album to advance humanity's understanding of our place in the universe. The Kings of Leon album isn't fundamental knowledge that one day might help us create a vaccine for lung cancer. Although, honestly, I've never listened to a Kings of Leon album, so I could be wrong here. And yet, though, Nature continually labels Sci-Hub as a pirate site, with even a pointless subhead halfway through that just reads, pirate site, followed by completely nonsensical accusations from Elsevier, like that Sci-Hub threatens the integrity of the scientific record and the safety of university and personal data, and that they compromise the security of libraries and higher education institutions, without providing a single scrap of evidence that any of that is happening. Literally, all the site does is display the exact same paper that Elsevier does without the $30 cover charge. Over on Twitter, Elbakyan posted her own full comment that she gave to Nature that's worth reading in full. I've linked to it. She points out that it is actually publishers like Elsevier and Springer who threaten the progress of science because paywalls prevent the average person from accessing the whole of scientific knowledge, which effectively then becomes the private property of some corporation. She ends by stating that any law against knowledge is fundamentally unjust and hoping that Nature will have enough honesty to publish her comments in full, which obviously they did not. I think it's pretty clear where I stand on this. The oligarchy these publishers have formed to basically control how science is consumed is immoral and antithetical to the pursuit of humanity's knowledge of the universe in which we live. I'm not sure what the end solution to all of this is. Sci-Hub alone will not fix things. It is a band-aid on a much larger wound caused by the fundamental way that science is done in our society. In a word, the problem is capitalism. We simply shouldn't tie the pursuit of knowledge to money. But knowledge is tied to money, like everything in our society is. So how do we untie that? I honestly don't know. And if I had to guess, it would be far too complex for a YouTube video. But in the meanwhile, we shouldn't rip that Band-Aid off. Sci-Hub is an objectively good website that makes the world a better, smarter place. I hope that they win every lawsuit that they face.